Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whatever the time zone is for you, wherever you are. My name is Terry MacMullan, and I'm honored to contribute to Plato. I think this is a wonderful organization. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'll use the eerie powers of Zoom to uh, share my screen and kind of talk you through a short PowerPoint that has some notes, largely for my own benefit, and then we can have most of our time be a discussion about these wonderful things. So, can I just get an audio confirmation that y'all are seeing the first slide there? Is everything looking okay, everybody? Awesome, great. So just some caveats. I am going to be, and I cleared this with our hosts. I'm going to be talking primarily about TTRPGs, tabletop role-playing games, not so much video RPGs or VRPGs. I'm going to focus my comments on the use of RPGs within K-12 and university curricula. Since this is a P4C group, I'm going to skip talking about what P4C is. I'll offer some of my own insights that I've gotten from doing this for a few years. And I'm going to end with some questions, so hopefully open discussion. And my hope is that we can make this a decentered conversation and not have me play sage on the stage so that we can hopefully cross-pollinate and ask each other questions. All right, so let's get into it. So take a look at those colors in that Venn diagram. And a very important thing you're going to notice is that the colors make no sense because I am colorblind. So thank you, Chris, for getting the joke. I appreciate that. What I'm going to talk about today is at the intersection of three different phenomena. On the upper left, we have P4C, the practice of philosophy for K-12 students. I'm going to talk a little bit about RPGs within traditional, that is to say, non-philosophical K-12 education, and then RPGs within university philosophical curricula. What I'm talking about is at the intersection of all three, the use of RPGs to do P4C. So you can see there's philosophy in K-12, there's RPGs helping students learn traditional K-12 curricula, there's RPGs helping university students understand philosophy curriculum. I'm trying to put all three of those together. So first, what is an RPG? I'm going to guess some of you are familiar and some of you aren't. The philosopher Daniel Anderson has a really lovely, succinct description of what an RPG or role-playing game is. RPGs are a collective storytelling experience in which a group of players take on roles of characters in a fictional story. In tabletop RPGs, players take turns proposing what their actions are, and then they roll dice to determine the outcome of these actions. So it's this idea that it is a collective form of storytelling. One of the oldest and most well-known RPGs, you can see an image on the left there, is the very famous game Dungeons and Dragons, which is 50 years old this year. That right there is the new Player's Handbook that just came out a few weeks ago. This is a very Tolkien-inspired game. It was so Tolkien-inspired that Tolkien's estate sued them for the use of some of the names of some of the creatures. That's why you could play a halfling, but not a hobbit. Anyway, wonderful game used for lots of things, but in the last 20 years RPGs have had just a wonderful proliferation of creativity, and you can see lots of people coming up with very new original games. One of my favorite recent ones is called Coyote and Crow, which was designed and written by Connor Alexander and a team of more than three dozen indigenous writers, artists, and creatives who imagine an alternative future where colonization never happened. This is in a large part an attempt to make these games their own and also respond to the troublesome tropes of colonization that are latent inside some D&D games. So this is just to give you a sense that RPGs are huge. There's lots of them. There's no way I could aptly summarize all of them, but that's just to give you a sense of a couple bookends what you could do. Now, there's a lot going on, like I said, so this would be the upper right circle of that Venn diagram. Lots of work being done in traditional K-12 curriculum with RPGs. You can see there on the left examples of how different people can use RPGs to develop different parts of Common Core. There you can see how the biggest company working in RPGs, which is Wizards of the Coast, who currently owns Dungeons and Dragons. They came out this past year with curriculum, whatchamacallit, modules. They came out with log on here and you can learn how to use Dungeons and Dragons for these, course objectives, program objectives, things like that. So a lot going on there. The bottom circle of those three circles that I showed you was our TTRPGs in university classrooms. Now this is growing slowly, but let me take that back. There's only a little bit going on this sector now, but it's growing really, really quickly. And I always have my ears open to hear about people who are doing really cool things. A person who I'm absolutely, I'm a huge fan of this person. Their name is Rebecca Scott. They're at Harper College. She works again with university students, but I would consider reaching out to her if see if she's interested in presenting to Plato, because she's fantastic. She right now, like as we speak, this semester, she is teaching an ethics class, which on paper is just a regular university ethics class, where she is using a very simple post-apocalyptic RPG called The Quiet Year. It's a collective map drawing game where you use an actual deck of cards to randomize events, and people draw a map together after, kind of a vaguely defined war. And in the winter, the bad guys are coming back. And how do we respond to problems? How do we make sure everybody has water? And so she teaches people first these ethical theories, and then she uses the quiet year to apply some of these theories. So a really innovative and amazing educator that is, again, just showing some of the resources, some of the potential that these games have for teaching philosophy. So I spent a couple of summers working on, actually spent a couple of years developing a way of using a modified version of Dungeons and Dragons to teach, to practice P4C with K-12 students. So some of the general ideas are that you can use RPGs to imagine hypothetical situations where students can test and explore theories. Think we're all familiar with trolley games or things like that, right? Trolley car ethics. Instead, you can have a far, far more intricate and elaborate version of hypothetical situations where you can test ethical theories. Um, you can put students, players, into really tricky situations and give them the opportunity to talk through these situations in a way that is safe, fun, and engaging. And I'll talk a little bit in a second about how to make these things safe. And then finally, one of the funnest thing that happens, and this is something that Rebecca was posting about just the other day on Facebook, was she was a little worried that her class was going off the rails. It was getting really hot. They were getting really angry with each other. And then she felt like after a few weeks, they gelled and they really became a community of inquiry. They started to understand how to talk to each other. And it was the game that gave them the context, right? To feel comfortable, to practice talking to each other through these difficult situations, to get a feeling of what a community of inquiry would be. So, like I said, these are just a couple of the stills from the game that I ran over several summers, where I put students inside the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I let them know at the outset that I was going to put them in some really tricky ethical situations. For example, they're in war and they're told, oh, that's the command tent. Go attack the command tent. The great Gilgamesh wants you to do that. And then they get up there and they find out it's the medical tent. And they have to decide, do I disobey my captain? What makes something right or wrong? Do I follow orders blindly? Do I attack somebody who's defenseless? They always they always disobey the captain. That's pretty easy bet to make. But then we talk about, is rule following always right? What makes it wrong? When do you do it right? What gives you the opportunity to override? Things like that. So last thing, and I'm very mindful of wanting to keep my time tight here. I just want to give a couple concrete strategies that I found are really, really important for using these tools ethically and responsibly and effectively. First, and this is a little bit of a term of art, is you need to have a zero session. So usually session one is when the game begins. you need to have a session before the game begins. And this is where everybody talks about what the agreed upon rules and boundaries will be. For example, I told my students like, hey, there's going to be combat in this. There's going to be imagined combat, and that's okay. And we normally wouldn't do that, but this is the part of the milieu of the game that we're in. Um, Along those same lines, during your zero session, it's imperative that you use what are called safety tools. Now, these are becoming very accepted. These are becoming actually in the last 2 or 3 years, they've become pretty widely used in organized recreational RPG play. And it can be something as simple as an actual physical card that you hold up or a phrase. When I play Dungeons and Dragons on the weekends, our agreed upon phrase is just pause for a second. And if you say pause for a second, it could be anything from I didn't understand what just happened, or pause for a second, you're talking about spiders too much, and this is creeping me out. And so it's important for players and game masters to have agreed upon tools that they can use to pause the game and pull everybody out of the game for just a moment to figure out what was confusing or bothering people. As you can imagine, if you're playing with younger folks, it's really important to have this ability to kind of hit the brakes on the game so that they can feel safe if you put them in a tricky situation. And then last two things that I'll talk about, and this is something that comes, hopefully we can talk about this later. You need to have a structured way to work in discussions. Now, when you play a regular game of Dungeons and Dragons, your party, they go through, they have the fight, they raid the dungeon, they help save the wizard, whatever it is. Um, but when we do P4C practice, it's really important to have them face the scenario, but then the really rich part is when you discuss what happened. Why did we do that? And why, how, you were given an order and you disobeyed. Why did you feel comfortable doing that, right? So in Dungeons and Dragons, for example, there's a mechanical rule called long rests. I often joke the most magical part of Dungeons and Dragons is not that you can cast a fireball spell or that you can meet a unicorn. It's that you and your friends can just say the phrase, we take a long rest, and then your character sleeps a full long night of 8 hours. Anyway, when you have these long rests, you incorporate what I called wise dreams. And so you imagine the players use that opportunity while their characters are sleeping to talk about what they did during the previous day. And then finally, and after this, I'll move on to our questions. It's really important, I find, in games like Dungeons and Dragons to remove alignments. Now, some games like Dungeons and Dragons have alignments, which are when you choose your character's disposition towards order and compassion. So if you say you want it to be a Robin Hood type, you would say, I'm chaotic good. I don't really care about the law, but I care very much about people. Or if you wanted to be a Darth Vader type and say, you were more fascist, you would be lawful evil. I care very about law and order, but I'm cruel and ruthless. I find it's really important to get rid of alignments because that takes away what an existentialist would call bad faith character behavior. A lot of times, and I often find this true of teenagers when you're playing with them recreationally. They'll always tell you, "What's the evilest thing I can be?" Because they often want to play out a fantasy of just being horrible and mean and bad. And they'll say, like, "Why'd you do that terrible thing?" And they'll say, "Oh, I had to. My character's chaotic evil. What am I supposed to do?" Instead, you ask the student players to play their character as if they or their spirit was in that situation. This is really important so that they can actually have a closer relationship to the decision-making process, which makes it easier for them to talk about it. They're less talking about a third-party fictional character, and instead they're more talking about a hypothetical version of themselves. So I'd love to talk more about some of these details, but I want to turn things open to the group. So these are just my suggestions for things that we could talk about to kind of open things up a little bit. Does anybody else on the Zoom call have any stories or accounts of using games like these in their P4C practice? What other factors do y'all think we should consider in incorporating TTRPGs? Things having to do with the audience, things having to do with the practice of philosophy. And then just what other questions do you have for me or for each other about this? So thanks again. Hopefully that was a good opening, and maybe we can talk about it now.